Was the city of Mariupol forced to vote under the barrel of a gun? Were members of Ukraine's armed forces stuffing ballots? And is Ukraine, again, a hotbed of anti-Semitism? I'm Marko Suprun, and this is StopFake, the place where we set the record straight on fakes about Ukraine. So let's get to it. On Sunday, April 21, Ukraine held runoff presidential elections in which Volodymyr Zelensky won with over 70% of the vote, while incumbent President Poroshenko received just under 25%. On April 26, Financial Times correspondent Roman Olyarchuk wrote, quote, "Ukraine will become the only country outside of Israel to have Jewish heads of state and government," alluding to the fact that President-elect Zelensky in an interview said he is Jewish and that Prime Minister Groysman is also a Ukrainian with Jewish roots. Why is this significant? Well, Russian media have been pushing a narrative for a long time that Ukraine is a hotbed for anti-Semitism, that a fascist junta has taken over the country, backed by the CIA, of course, and that Nazi glorification is a part of Ukraine's media and cultural landscape. StopFake has been debunking these fakes for years. For example, shortly after the annexation of Crimea in March 2014, Russian TV channel Russia Today aired a report claiming that a spray-painted message, "Death to Jews," appeared on a Kiev synagogue. RT went on to quote Rabbi Misha Kapustin, in which he expresses concern for his safety and the safety of his family. In reality, the synagogue was located in Simferopol, and the graffiti appeared shortly after Russian armed forces occupied the peninsula. In fact, Rabbi Kapustin was the author of a call to save Ukraine from Russian occupation. His quote, "Simferopol is our city, and it is occupied by the Russian military. Help us save our country, save Ukraine. Ask for your government's help. Against Russia, we feel helpless," appeared on Yevreysky Kiev, a site about Jewish life in Ukraine, on March the 2nd, 2014. In their search for fascists in Ukraine, Western journalists also spread the narrative that Ukraine is anti-Semitic. Back in June 2014, the world's largest news agency, the Associated Press, reported that Germany was easing immigration rules for Ukrainian Jews because of increases in reports of anti-Semitism. That article was titled "Germany Eases Immigration Rules for Ukrainian Jews" and was reprinted in countless international media outlets, including in Ukraine and Russia. StopFake reached out to Germany's Minister of Internal Affairs, Harold Neymans, and back then he said that there were no planned changes to immigration procedures. And then, in January 2018, Russian sites like RIA Novosti, Ukraina.ru, Strana.ua, and Moskovsky Komsomolets disseminated a story that Ukraine is the most anti-Semitic country in the post-Soviet space. They all referenced the Israeli Ministry of Diaspora Affairs' annual anti-Semitism report for 2017. However, Israeli newspaper Haaretz wrote that the report should be viewed with skepticism, that it is thin on methodology and data, and is far from being scientific, concluding that it seems to be a PR tool to justify the existence of the Diaspora Ministry. It's also important to remember that the Washington, D.C.-based Pew Research Center conducted a survey on anti-Semitism from June 2015 through July 2016 in 18 countries, something that we have talked about here at StopFake in the past. The results of their survey showed that only 5% of respondents in Ukraine would not be willing to accept Jews as citizens of their country. In neighboring countries, that number is significantly higher. 14% of Russians would not accept Jews as citizens. Poland's rate was 18% and Belarus was at 13%. The survey is another indicator that Ukraine has the lowest levels of anti-Semitism in the region. The Financial Times article quotes a member of the Brodsky Synagogue in Kiev who said, quote, "There is a misconception internationally that it is dangerous for Jews to come here, that nationalists will beat you up if you speak Russian. Indeed, especially when international journalists parrot Russian fakes from the Kremlin's factory of lies." Russian media outlets like the Luhansk Information Center, Ukraina.ru, and others were reporting that the presidential administration was distributing ballots at polling stations already filled out in President Poroshenko's favor. They also claimed that the polling stations located near the line of contact were specifically created to rig the elections in Poroshenko's favor. We call this fake a triple header: a fake about ballots, the creation of polling stations for electoral fraud, and that the presence of the Ukrainian Armed Forces was itself a provocation. Now, to facilitate voting for military personnel in the combat zone, Ukraine's Central Election Commission, together with the General Staff of the Armed Forces, created 79 specialized polling stations, and another 14 polling stations were set up in hospitals run by Ukraine's Ministry of Defense. The headquarters of Ukraine's military operation reported that turnout was high and that military personnel were able to vote on a rotating basis, that is, leaving some personnel at their positions while others voted. They also reported that international observers at polling stations did not record any violations. The claim that members of Ukraine's armed forces were in some way compelled to vote for incumbent President Poroshenko also doesn't hold up to scrutiny. According to voting results, military personnel split their vote between both candidates, with Poroshenko receiving 9,927 votes and Zelensky getting 9,718, meaning that Poroshenko only received 209 more votes than Zelensky. According to Newsfront, Novorossiya, and the Russian Ministry of Defense media group Zvezda, the presidential elections were controlled by the Ukrainian junta and punishers in the unoccupied parts of the Donbas, and that armed Kiev rebels were parked outside of polling stations and armored personnel carriers. They concluded that the armed forces of Ukraine were in full control of the vote in Mariupol, a city that the Russian media referred to as being occupied by Kiev rebels. Now, Russian media distorted a report by Hromadske Radio in which soldiers were interviewed at two polling stations considered to be particularly important. Mariupol is a city close to the front lines, and the army was dispatched there to provide additional security for the polling stations. Ukraine's law enforcement agencies have repeatedly stated that the patrols stationed outside voting precincts do not have the right to interfere in the work of the polling station commissions. The only way law enforcement can enter voting stations is by the invitation of election commission members. In other words, neither soldiers nor police officers or other law enforcement representatives are allowed to influence the voting process. They are present exclusively for monitoring and security purposes. Moreover, police are required to maintain political neutrality. They are forbidden from consulting voters and campaigning for candidates or influence the voting process in any way. That's it for this week. You can find much more dissected disinformation on the StopFake website. Be vigilant, look out for fakes, and if you spot any disinformation about Ukraine, forward it to us for a truth autopsy. I'm Marko Suprun, and this is StopFake. Thanks for watching.